had a little bit of delay, as you are well aware. So I'm going to go straight into it. William may have already told you this, but I'll say it very quickly. The idea behind Black Pack is that, and the interviews, is that I'm sure you have heard the terminology standing on giant shoulders. So what we have decided to do is that we have decided to get hold of these giants, and we are going to be interviewing some of the giants so that they can tell us their stories and give us insight into their life experiences and what they draw on for guidance, inspiration, and sustenance. But we do this by actually asking them what's in their backpack, in their black pack, and what tools, what wisdom, what things have they gained in their journey that they can share with us. And I am delighted to tell you, and I know you know that our first guest is Margaret Busby. Today, Margaret Busby, OBE, publisher, editor, writer, broadcaster, and literary critic. In the 1960s, Margaret Busby became Britain's the first and youngest Black female book publisher. And over a decade, she's had an extensive career devoted to literature, publishing, and diversity. Last year, for example, in 2020, Margaret chaired the Booker Prize judging panel. In 2019, in the Black History Month in the UK, Zadie Smith, the well-known author, said, and I quote, "Margaret has been a cheerleader, an instigator, an organizer, defender, and a celebrator of Black arts for the past 50 years, shouting about us from the rooftops, even when few people cared to listen. She has helped change the landscape of both UK publishing and arts coverage, and so many Black British artists owe her a debt. I know I do." End of quote. So this evening, you have waited for a long time, and we are very grateful. Welcome, Margaret Busby, OBE. Margaret is our first giant whose shoulders we have stood on and who we were going to be speaking to. Welcome, Margaret.
Thanks. Thank you much. I keep talking about me as a giant. I'm only 5'2.5".
Well, Margaret, that's even better, because at 5'2.5", you have done so many amazing things. Now I'm going to get straight into it because we have been waiting. And the first thing I want to ask is this. You know, when I look up and we look up things about you on the internet and read various articles, many of the pieces start by saying with this sentence: Margaret Busby, born in Ghana, educated in the UK, Britain's youngest and first Black woman publisher, when in 1967 she co-founded Allison and Busby with Clive Allison. That's not the question. My question is, it goes from Margaret Busby, born in Ghana, educated in UK, and it jumps to the other things. Can you give us, Margaret, any insight into your childhood and youth that may have helped to have nurtured your journey into the arts and the literary world where we mainly place you now?
Wow, you do say that all the time, and I wish they wouldn't. I mean, okay, it may be true that I was a young. That's not the point. I was born in Ghana, yes. I came over to Brit school when I was quite young, and that was because my father, who was actually born in Barbados, he went to Trinidad when he was 6 weeks old, so he grew up in Trinidad. His father was a tailor, so he didn't have lots of expectations of expensive education, but he was bright, so he got his education by scholarships. He won the Ireland Scholarship. He was actually at school with CLR James, who is another Trinidadian hero, and he came to Britain. He studied medicine. He became a doctor, and after he qualified, he worked for 10 years in East End of London, but then he edged to Ghana, and he was a doctor in the bush, as we called it, where there were not many schools or opportunities to send your children to school. So my brother and my sister and I were sent to school in Britain because my father had, and my mother too, had great belief in the British education, because my father had gone to school in Trinidad to a school called Queen's Royal College, which was a sort of British public school, if you like, one of the premier institutions. And my mother had also had to work hard. She studied as a nurse in Britain, and she went back to Ghana. She was a nursing sister. And they wanted to give us the best opportunities. So we came over here, my sister, my brother and I, and we were at boarding school. And so that was where I had education. My parents had to make lots of sacrifices. They couldn't. In fact, my mother once told me she had one dress she would wear in a day, wash at night, and wear the next day, so that she could save money to send to pay for our schooling. So there were lots of sacrifices that my parents made, and that was the start of wherever I am now. Started from what I got from my parents. They didn't leave us money, but they left us principles. They gave us an education, and that was the beginning of my journey.
Thank you. Thanks very much
Does
for
that
that.
answer your question? I can't remember what the question was.
That was quick, but it did give us some insight, and so many things resonate in terms of when you hear many other people's story about the sacrifices their parents made, and so on, and this whole thing about the belief in the British education system. So I'm going to go straight in then and ask you, as we said, the premise of this event is that we're going to ask you to share with us from your black pack. Share with us wisdom, tools, things that have helped you on your journey. So I'm going to go straight in and ask you about to share that first thing. What is the first item that you're going to pull out of your pack to share with us and tell us why you have chosen that particular item?
Wow, that's I didn't expect it to be like that quickly. No, well, I mean, one of the things I'll have. Okay, one of the trade items I have is this book that was given to my father by C.L.R. James. It's inscribed for George, and it's a copy of Aimé Césaire's book, Return to My Native Land. Now, I'm not sure why my father was given that by CLR, but when I started publishing C.L.R. James, one of the collections of selected writings that we published used a quote from this as the title, and the quote was, "No race holds the monopoly of beauty, of intelligence, of strength, and there is a place for all, the rendezvous of victory." And I think that is saying something about the inclusivity of the world. I mean, we don't have to make a special effort. No race holds the monopoly of intelligence, of strength, and there's a place for all at the rendezvous of victory. So I think we can all be victorious if we have that sort of a view of life. So this Return to My Native Land, inscribed to my CLR James to my father, is one of my special items I'll have in the backpack.
And
Well, I ought to say that I think I'd like to have a dictionary. Can I have a dictionary as well
yes,
in my black back? Because I learned to read and write when I was quite young, and I remember the first 3 words I learned to spell. It was when one of my Trinidadian cousins was visiting us in school, so I was probably about 4. My cousin David decided he was going to teach my elder brother to spell, and he chose some difficult words, and he kept repeating them and drumming them to my brother, and I learned these words by default. So here's me, 3 years old. Like the first 3 words I learned to spell were fascinating, necessary, and picturesque. And I think that's a metaphor for the way life should be: fascinating, necessary, and picturesque.
okay, thank you. But I'm going to go in a little bit further with that first point you said about the book in terms of no race is is actually more special, prominent than any other. Tell us about, because one of the things we see is you doing a lot of pushing in terms of having, we could say in some ways as the pushback for Black and brown people. But even if it's not a pushback, what we know, and one of the reasons why we're speaking with you, is that the difference you made in allowing, helping, inspiring Black and brown people, and a lot of women in particular, when I think of the book that you have actually edited in terms of Daughters of Africa, and what you did to actually give a voice. So can you just speak a little bit more about this whole thing about this race being, the equality, and how it has been impacted, how you
I
have
think that I think one of the things that we have to be aware of is the necessity for us to be able to tell our own stories, to disseminate our own stories. Now, although you talk a lot about, or people talk a lot about being the first this or the youngest that, I think you have to realize that there are other people that inspire us. In fact, the first publisher in this country was John LaRose of New Beacon Books. And although I didn't know him when I started, New Beacon Books started in 1966. And my company, Allison and Busby, started the next year. And I knew nothing because I left university when I was 20. And by that time, I'd already the idea of a publishing company. So you can tell I didn't have any knowledge of life in general, let alone what the publishing world should be like. So I think it was, and of course I did meet John and work with John and also with Jessica Huntley, who's another pioneer in terms of Black publishing in Britain. So we all were kind of part of the same push, if you like. And one of the important ventures that came out in the 80s and lasted, and it came out of the unity between Louverture and Race Today Publications eventually, was the International Book Fair of Record Black and Third World Books. Now that was a key event which happened every year initially, and that was something that showcased not only publications and publishers and the works and creativity of people of African descent, Black people in general in this country, but around the world, in every continent, because everybody came for the Black Book Fair. So I think it's important to remember those sorts of initiatives. And surely I did the anthology Daughters of Africa in 1992 and New Daughters of Africa in 2019, was it? Or was it last year? Yeah, 2019. No, the year before last, my goodness. Yeah, and that was simply to make the point that there are a lot of women of African descent who deserved to be read and enjoyed who are not. And that was simply because, well, I remember very clearly, I would buy a copy of books, a book of short stories from the Caribbean, as there were one or two of those in the days, normally from the educational publishers. And it wouldn't say by men, but you wouldn't find many women in it, or, poetry from Africa, not necessarily by men, but where the women restore the balance, if you like, in those omissions. And I think we all should just take the view that the world of literature becomes richer if we stop excluding people. And I think that has been my mission all along. It's not to say that I don't read books unless they're by Black writers or Black women writers. I read all sorts of things. And obviously I had to for the Booker Prize. So it's not an exclusive thing. It's not even to focus, it's the way that things should be. There's a lot of good writing and there's a lot of important publishing that's being done. And we want to give it all the opportunity to reach as many people as possible, to enrich everybody's lives.
Thank you, Margaret. Certainly, in terms of, I can concur with you saying that you don't just read books. Sorry, I realized I was muted again. I'm saying I certainly can concur with you, and you say you do not read books just by Black and brown people or by women, because if any of you have seen some of the other pictures of Margaret in her office and Margaret in anywhere else where there are books, you have to fight and fall over the books before you can find Margaret. There are all sorts of books, every book you can find, and she has been on the judging panel for so many book prizes that, yeah, she's out there with lots and lots of books. So we know that, but let's ask about your second item, Margaret. So the first one was, as you said, that book that was given by CLR. James, what is the second item you'd like to share with us and give us some background and the story behind that one?
An item? What sort of item you have in mind? Music.
Music.
And we'll get to that later, do we?
Yeah, whichever one, your choice. Tell us which one you want to go to.
Well, one of the things, I mean, we've talked about words, and one of the things that is important to me is when we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants or whatever, passing the baton, is to share any information on other people. And so there are a couple of precepts, if you like, that's kind of, I think I got them through the way my parents operated their lives. And they are things by which I live. And one of them, well, I'll paraphrase because it's something I was doing before I actually found this quotation. And it goes something like, It's amazing what you can accomplish there who takes the credit. You're not doing something so somebody says, oh, you know, well done you, or you're the best, the first that. You're doing it because you think it needs to be done, it'll be done. You're doing it not for a byline, not for any particular reward, but you're doing it to try and, I guess, to make the world a better place, to pass on information. And the other quotation about, which kind of, again, relates to passing on information. And this was something I first heard a version of this. I saw a version of this on an email from a friend of mine, who's now a friend, who's a Ghanaian photographer, an important photographer called James Barnell, who's now in his 90s. And he used to have at the bottom of his email something to the effect, plant trees under which you will never sit. And I think that's a variation of a Greek saying, which was something like, society grows, a society thrives when older people plant trees under which they will sit. And I think that again speaks to passing on information and sharing whatever you have with other people. So those are the two precepts that in my life. And I'd like to pass those on to anybody who wants to think about them and perhaps try and do the same in different, whatever way they can.
Okay, thank you so much for that. While you were speaking, I was looking at something and to find this little quote that you had said, which I think supports that. You said some time ago, it's easy enough to be the first. We can each try something and be first, the first woman or the first African woman to do X, Y, and Z. But if it's something worthwhile, you don't want to be the only. And I hope I can in any way inspire someone to do what I have done, but to learn from my mistakes and do better than I have done. And I think that seems to resonate with what you've just said about this whole thing about planting trees that you may not sit on and so on. Now, what comes to mind when you think about the number of people who will cite you as being this inspiration, who've helped them to find their voice, to get their voice and to be out there?
I'm thrilled if I have inspired me to either to write or to publish. And I certainly think more involved on the publishing side. Although, of course, we want writers to be published in the best possible way, to have the best editors, to be promoted in the right way. And to all those ends, the Black Writers Guild was formed a few months ago. But I think we also need to be aware of the fact that we need to have a presence in the publishing. And I think there are people who I think have been inspired by the fact that I was a publisher, try and be publishers themselves. And I think one of the ways I could even have influenced people or inspired people is people who thought, well, if that young thing can do it, anybody can. Because if I could start a publishing company at the age of whatever it was, 20, or without any money or experience or anything, then it can be done. All you can do is your best and take one step at a time. And I think we still need to try a way to have a presence.
Good night, everybody. Just wanted to add my thanks, Margaret. Now, when they say you confer on somebody a knighthood, as our first Black Pack host, we want to confer on you the Order of the Black Hood. The services to our community that we greatly appreciate.
Thank you. I greatly accept. But I think it needs to.
So people can put their cameras on and give them some claps and thank our wonderful interviewee tonight,
outside
Margaret.
London. We just need to have
listen to some music as we
go
out. So enjoy the rest of your evening.
It's not simply exclusion, but it shows what can be when you include it.
Before I go, Margaret, to my next question about your backpack, I just wanted to ask this one. You know, you spent a number of years and, you know, a lot of your life in different forms in the publishing. How did you press through when the challenge of publishing became too great or it just became really heavy? How did you keep going? Because I'm sure at times it must have been pretty tough.
Well, it's always tough. I mean, it's hard to do anything that just requires a lot of energy. The thing is, if you're doing something you believe in and that's something that you enjoy, and I have done different things. I mean, with the publishing company, I was there for 20 years, and another company called EarthScan, we published people like Vance Panel. But then I moved on, and I've been freelancing in different ways for, the best part of 3 decades. So I've been my own boss, and I've never had a lot of money. When we started out at Allison and Busby, there were 3 of us actually, and we were sharing £1,000 a year 3 ways. So some weeks we had £7, some weeks we had £6. So I was doing all sorts of other things to make up the difference. I was at that point married to a jazz musician who had no money either, and so I was doing work in publishing. I was doing a program for the BBC African Service. I was doing freelance work for Central Office of Information, a television program called London 9. I was doing a lot of different things, doing bits of writing. And so it was just, even as a publisher, we didn't have money necessarily in the bank. We had to think, well, have we got enough money now to do the next book? And if we did, then we could go ahead. So we were just going one step at a time, not overstretching ourselves, trying to do things that we believed in that other people didn't necessarily do themselves. So we were making our own pathway, if you like, without looking at what conventional way of doing things was, and also getting support from a lot of friends, and whether I've mentioned people like Jessica Huntley and John LaRose, who were good friends of mine, and I participated in the Black Book Fair, and we helped each other. Sometimes Jessica would, I did an index for a book of Jessica's, or she'd ask me how to sell this or whatever. So we were all in the same bubble, if you like. And I think that's what you need to do. We need to support each other in whatever way we can. And it's not a question of one of us getting in and closing the door afterwards. It's a question of leading other people with us, so that that's all I can say. I'm happy to have the spotlight on me, because it gives me a chance to tell other people how to do what I've done. But it's not to say that I am better or know more. Okay. But I will certainly share what I know with whoever needs to. One of the things I find myself doing occasionally is holding the hand of other people who have become publishers, and they've run into some problem, and I will get a WhatsApp message or an email, what should I do about this? And I'm happy to give my point of view. So long may that continue.
That's helped a lot of people. It's helped a lot of people. I'm going to go on one last point before I ask for the next item, and that is, you've mentioned Jessica Huntley a number of times, and John LaRose as two people who, as you said, working together, supporting each other. Just tell us a little bit more about who Jessica Huntley is, please.
Well, I think you need to have a special about Jessica. Jessica was the founder of Vogel Louverture Publications, which started in 1969 with a book by Walter Rodney called How Europe in Underdeveloped Africa. And we were just good friends right up until she died. In fact, I'm wearing still a bracelet that I had when she died, and it has her date of birth and date of death on it. And in fact, quite often, it was quite funny. We had a great time giggling together about a lot of things. Although, both she and John were big people compared to me. They were a generation ahead of me. But people might phone me up and I'd say, well, no, why don't you just phone up Jessica Huntley? She's more interesting. And they'd say, well, we phoned her up, and she said, phone you up. So we had this sort of toing and froing, because neither of us were particularly keen on, being in the limelight just for its own sake. So Jessica is certainly somebody who, together with Eric Huntley, her husband, made a lot of contributions to publishing, to educate Black children's education, to all sorts of things, as did John LaRose in Britain, and also internationally. So these are names that I repeat because they shouldn't be forgotten. They should be, their books should be known about. I mean, as I mentioned, Walter Rodney was somebody that Jessica published. John LaRose published the first novel that was published in Britain by C.L.R. James, called Minty Alley. Actually, I did a play of Minty Alley. It came out in 1936. I think New Beacon reissued it in about 1971. I did a play of it in about 1990 something, and it is still a notable book. And it's the first novel by a Black Caribbean person, Black writer, published in this country in the 30s. So that was something Beacon kept in print, and a lot of other titles which are important. So between us all, I mean, we shared people, authors in common. I published Andrew Salke's poetry. Jessica published Andrew Salke. You know, we shared cover designers. Errol Lloyd designed covers, I think, for New Beacon books, for Bogle Lubitschall and Farris and Busby. So there was a lot of overlap in the way we worked. We had a printer called Villiers Press, run by somebody called John Sankey, who was really a wonderful guy, because he let us all use his print. He printed books for us all, but wasn't that tough on the fact that we didn't have that. You know, we had a lot of things in common. We were all trying to make our way step by step, doing what we believed in, and trying to make a difference to the way works by Black writers and other writers were disseminated in this country and around the world.
Thank you for that. And I think, yeah, and we have seen that. And I asked to clarify it about Jessica Huntley, because in a sense, she's another one of the giants, but she can't speak for herself now because she is no more with us. But the theme and the strong point we're getting through is this whole thing about supporting each other and being there for each other and pressing on if you believe in something. So it takes me to asking you for your third item, and remember, when I say item, it could be a piece of wisdom, you know, we know, a saying, a book, a piece of music. What is the next bit of wisdom on the journey that you'd like to share with us, please?
Well, I love music, so I would like to. So one of the sadnesses I've had last year was that my wonderful sister, who was again a wonderful support in every way to me, she died. She had cancer, and she had been, not only in terms of being a wonderful sister, and she's probably the person who I'd spent more time with all my life, because we were together from childhood and in London. And you mentioned my anthology, this New Daughters of Africa, and Eileen did a lot of the translations in here. In fact, this is a new paperback edition, and it's dedicated to Eileen. And she affected so many people. She was somebody, again, who I think got a lot of her precepts from art to deal with people. She was a great connector. She was a great sharer. I used to joke, never say to Eileen, I like that dress, because she'd take it off and give it to you. So she was always giving. And she had the high or low. I mean, my father, I remember when he was a doctor, people would come and visit us in Sahum, the village where my father's clinic was, and they'd sit and eat with us, and you didn't know whether they were dustmen or ministers. They were just people, and so you related people for who they were. And that's certainly something that Eileen has given me and gave to a lot of people. And the number of people who I've connected with because of Eileen, because of the way she is. I'm talking about people she met in the street, people she gave a lift to, who she then stayed friends with, who helped. She helped all her life. And she also connected with the people who, to me, who became family friends. For example, on the day my sister died in May last year, she had a message from Stevie Wonder, who was a friend, who was a family friend actually, but she first met him in the 70s when she interviewed him. She also worked for the Beatles. So from the 70s until the present day, Stevie has been a wonderful help and support. And on the day my sister died, he sent a message to another good family friend, Andrea Rosario, And this was a link to a piece of music that he actually sang on Martin Luther King Day last year. It was from his album Inner Visions. This was a tune called Visions. And I would like to have that because it reminds me of so many things. I love Stevie's music anyway, brilliant musician. I love him to death. It reminds me of Eileen, reminds me of my friend Andrea, reminds me of all sorts of wonderful things. And I would like to share that.
And we're going to, because we knew that one. So I'm going to ask Wayne, are you able to just give us a little piece of that one?
So beautiful. Do we have to find our way to the visions in our mind? Do you want to?
Thank you very much for that, Wayne. Thank you. Thank you. That's just a really small snippet of that particular track. And I know, as you've said, that, you know, they've been a wonderful friendship, and that's been really fully appreciated. And also, I know when we've spoken in the past, you've talked about one piece of music. There are so many important pieces, but whatever Stevie puts out, it's a big thing for you. Now, I'm going to move on a little bit now to ask about the next item. So this is going to be...
How many items am I going to have?
Is this our fourth? Can you tell us, because you've talked to us a little bit about the book, you've talked about the piece of music, you've talked about, so tell us the next item. What's the next piece, please, that you want to share with us?
Wow. Friendship. What's there to say? Friendship, dancing. I love dancing. I get dancing with my partner Luke whenever we can. Sometimes it's just around the sitting room. But I'm not sure. Keep listening to music, keep dancing, keep active, and value your friendships. And what else is there to say? Love, friendship, sisterhood. Those are all things that matter to me. And I think we should all try and make the most of those things.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for actually sharing those points with us. It's not over yet because I know we started a bit late, but there have been some questions that people wish to ask. But picking up on that last point, this whole thing, there is that theme about friendship, about supporting, about valuing others, about recognizing where, the part that we play, and that we build things not just for ourselves, but for other people. And certainly that's one of the things that in the time I have known you, that seems to be a consistent theme, that even if you don't say it a lot, you certainly live it. And many, many people, because again, one of the latest thing I've written is where, the points being made, if you know what, here is this legend that's around, and so often we just don't hear that much. So we are absolutely delighted as to the bits that we have heard. Now I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that's come up in the chat. And one of them is to say, I wonder how, this thing about what is to give us some idea of your favorite authors. Oh dear. They actually ask about 5 authors. Who are Margaret's top 5 authors?
5 authors. No, I don't like hierarchical, ranking authors in that way. But one of the people I always turn to for wisdom in her writing, particularly essays, is Toni Morrison. So Toni Morrison would certainly be one of the people that I would in my any list I did. There are just so many different writers, and it's difficult to say these are the top 5 or put above another, because you read different things in different moods. Sometimes you want to read poetry, sometimes you want to read essays, sometimes you want to read fiction. And that's one of the things that I like about the anthologies I've done, because they include every genre, so you can read different things in different moods. Who can I mention? African writers, whether we talk about Ngugi wa Thiong'o or Chinua Achebe or Wole Soyinka. There are Caribbean writers, whether you're talking about Lovelace, or there are so many different writers. And African American, I don't know why I'm focusing on Black writers, but there are people like James Baldwin, who's also full of wisdom. So there are writers who have brought me where I am. And I'd like to say as well, and we talked about people being inspirational, and I can remember very clearly when I was at school, so it's probably about 1961, coming across, I used to read this literary journal called John London. And one day or 1 week, it had on the cover a photograph of a Black African woman called Noni Jabavu. She was a South African woman, and she was just having her first memoir published. And she also became, she was a sort of important figure in literary circles in Britain, in London. And so she was an inspiration, because I for the first time, saw that a Black African woman could be part of the literary scene in England, which is where I found myself. Of course, later that there became others who had that sort of influence. I mean, I first met Toni Morrison in the 70s. At that point, she was the only Black editor I knew. And we connected. In fact,
You interviewed her
she
not Margaret?
I did interview her. She was over here when Beloved was being published. The British edition of Beloved was being published in, I think it was in 1987 or thereabouts. In fact, there was a possibility that she and I were going to be interviewed on some television program to do with editing. And then at the last minute, the item was dropped, because the perception was that, well, I guess that neither of us were that important, or Toni wasn't important, wasn't famous enough. And so we were really shocked at this, my friends and I, because Toni had been writing novels, for well over 15 years at that point. And so there was a young filmmaker called Emily Bridgewell who, together with, Toni had an hour free in her, so we film. So I didn't have time to reread the books. Cinder produced it. We made our own film, and we sold it eventually to Channel 4. I think it was sold to the Bandung. I can't remember for. And Toni went on and she won the Pulitzer Prize, and she went on and won the Nobel Prize in 1993. In fact, even when she won the Nobel Prize, she was not as well known as you might have thought she would be, because she was clearly not known in the literary establishment to the extent that my phone was going all the time saying, "Oh, can I 4 o'clock about Toni Morrison, who just won the Nobel Prize," because nobody else was available who knew her work. And in fact, at one point, somebody said to me, "Toni Morrison, who's he?" So yes, Toni was a great inspiration. She continued to be, and she she did a lot as an editor as well as a writer, in terms of taking on Black writers that she thought needed to be published. She was working with Random House. But I remember her conversation when she told me that she had to make sure that any Black writer she took on was successful, because otherwise the perception might be that Black writers didn't sell. So she certainly made a difference in terms of what she did as an editor, as what she did as a creative writer. So she's certainly somebody, she will be in my top list of people you're talking about, books she's written or influences.
Yeah.
So I would direct people to read all her essays as well as her novels.
Yeah.
Particularly a book I read often, which is called Playing in the Dark. Whiteness and the Literary Imagination. It's just full of a lot of wisdom. So, we were both doing what we did at the same time. I was an editor at the same time as she was an editor, and we connected. In fact, I remember that Jessica told me.
Jessica Huntley.
Jessica Huntley. We'd met Tony. In fact, we were at some event. Tony was speaking, and Jessica was at the back of the hall. We were both at the back, and we couldn't hear very well. So Jessica would say to me, what does she say? And I said, I don't know. I was going to ask you. and then Jessica said she invited Tony to supper, and Tony came to supper, and she was talking. They had quite a soft voice. But by the time she'd had supper, she was talking quite loudly. And Jessica said she said something to Tony about this and what made the difference. And Jessica says, although Tony didn't necessarily confirm this, what made the difference? Rice and peas, she said.
I'm gonna come in there because I have a couple more questions, but I am gonna concur because I heard that story also from Jessica, and so she's kept on that story about the difference that supper made, that meal made to Tony when she came around to the house for something to eat. Just a couple more, and then I'm going to go backwards to ask you to choose just one of the items. And that is a question that's come up is, has Bernardine Evaristo and Rennie Edulodge success singled out a turning point for Black writers and Black publishing? What do you think?
Have they? Sorry, what was the question again?
Have their successes, both these individuals, have their successes actually, singled out or pointed out a turning point for Black writers and for Black publishers?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. I think we have to remember that although those two writers you mentioned have given the attention they deserve, there are a lot of writers who don't get to be given the attention they deserve for a long time. And we know that last year marked kind of awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think that has made for a lot of concern, perhaps, amongst the publishing industry about how to try and do better. And I think it's wonderful that Bernardine and Rennie have both topped bestseller lists in that year. But what we have to hope for is that it's not just a passing thing, that next year things will revert to the way they've always been, which is something that was summed up for me by something I was told when I was promoting New Daughters of Africa in 2019, and I was at some festival, and a person in the audience said that they'd heard a publisher talk about the publishing world, and had actually referred to normal books and diverse books. In other words, normal books did not include us. And so we have to hope that whatever change we see happening now, and it's wonderful that a lot of younger people are now connecting with the movement and pushing for what should be our rights in the literary world as well as outside it. So we hope that this will continue. It will not just be a passing, gesture that makes people feel good about themselves, but something that will make people think about why has to wait so long to get to where we are,
Right.
and how to sustain those successes that we have seen in Bernardine and Rennie and many other writers.
Thank you so much. Now, the last, and just going backwards, because you've talked about some, I've called it items. We know that it's just really about sayings or thoughts or, you know, music, books. If you could only choose one of, not if you could, I'm going to ask you to choose one only of those that you feel would be the one you most want to pass on to anyone who is on the path. They may not have got as far along the path as you have, but who are on the path. Which of those would you pass on as a legacy, please?
I think the sayings that sum up the way you live your life are possibly more important than any one object. So I think if we each try to plant trees under which we will not necessarily sit ourselves, in other words, to share what we have, to try and see how we can benefit future generations as well as doing things for us as individuals. I'm not doing what I do so that I can become rich and famous. I'm doing what I do because I believe it's the right thing to do, and I want to share anything I have with other people who may benefit and or may like to know, may enjoy knowing some of the things that I would like to share with them. So there are benefits and there's pleasures to be had from sharing, and to pass on whatever you know to other people, to share whatever you know with other people without expecting any kind of reward is something that I think we should all think about. We may not all be able to achieve always, but we should certainly think about, why are you doing this? Are you doing it for yourself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You do it for other people as well as yourself.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you so much for that. And again, as I said, over the years, it has been seen so much about how your life has been one of giving and supporting. And whether you have, and I know you have heard it often, but those who are the recipient, they're not tired of saying it. And it's been absolutely wonderful. I mean, say in the chat, a number of people, they are, you know, some people are seeking further interviews, some are seeking for you to give advice on various other areas. And, you know, I'll speak on your behalf. You're tremendously busy, but you always reach out and help. And that's a fantastic legacy that you're going to leave. Let's just check if there are any other questions just before we move on, because we're coming towards closing. Any one last? Okay, folks, well, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed, Margaret. It has been an absolute delight. I don't want to taint it by apologizing for getting you in here late into the room and getting things messed up, but it's been so wonderful. And I know that we'd love to hear from you again. And until then, join us at our other events, because you've been very supportive. So thank you so much indeed. I'm going to now hand over and ask Celia to come in and just perform her song for us. Thank you again, Margaret. All power to you.
Thank you much.
Just adding my thanks, Margaret. It's been very interesting listening to your life story and what has inspired you. You spoke about Stevie Wonder, and I know that he is a big advocate for civil rights, which is something very dear to my heart. And someone else who was also a very big advocate for civil rights is Nina Simone. And I want to sing a Nina Simone song this evening, if that's okay. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. And I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say them aloud, say them clear, for the whole wide world to hear. I wish
wish I could share all the love that's in my heart. The moon, all the bars that keep us apart. I wish I could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree that every man should be free. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. And I wish I could do all the things that I can do. Though I'm way overdue, I'll be starting anew. Well, I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. I'd soar to the sun and look down at the sea, and I'd sing 'cause I know. Yes, I'll sing 'cause I know. I'm gonna sing 'cause I know. I'm gonna dance 'cause I know. Yeah, I'm gonna shout 'cause I know. I'm gonna sing 'cause I know. I'm gonna sing 'cause I know how it feels to be free, how it feels to be free.
Whoa, now that was Celia Wickham Anderson. Celia, one of the members of Black Voices, that absolutely wonderful international a cappella group. This time though, singing to us with some backing music. It is always fantastic to listen to you, Celia, and it is wonderful. Margaret, it has been a pleasure, an honor. And, you know, those people who came in and have been waiting and waiting to hear from you, I'm sure that they've had a wonderful, wonderful time listening. So thank you again, Margaret. Thank you, Celia. And just
thanks for inviting me, Marge.
Oh gosh, it's been such a pleasure. It's been all mine. It's, you know, I know there are other people looking and listening, but it's been my pleasure. I now want to just tell you about what's coming next. We do hope that you have enjoyed this evening with us and that it's been inspirational. And as William said at the beginning, we have other events that are planned. In 2 months' time, we have another Black Pack interview, following very much the same format in terms of having another giant who will join us, whom we can ask about their life and find out more about their journey and some of the wisdom, the tools, the ways of life that have sustained them. But for now, I'd like to share with you the absolute next event that we're having, and that's going to be on the 27th of February. So right at the end of the month, and it will be towards the end of the, Black History Month in the USA. And this one, it's critical conversations. I know if you are on, and most of you are on very early, that William have spoken about this already, but I'm just, you can see it on the screen. So please put it in your diary. It promises to be a very powerful event. It is very different from what we've had, but it's going to be very powerful nonetheless, where we're having some specialists in their field speaking with us, having a debate, taking questions about, as it says, state of the race, looking at the issues and how they present themselves at the present time in terms of the African diaspora and some of the issues that we are facing at this time in Earth's history, in our generational history and where we're from. So please, 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 I'm inviting you, I'm saying to go on the website, Quick Crack website, where you'll find more information. I'm also saying to you that check out in Eventbrite. And also when you go onto Quick Crack, will you please, we'll be very grateful if you will like the page, but more importantly, if you will subscribe so that next time when this is coming up, we can remind you so that you can come along and join us. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a great, great pleasure to be here. I thank you because we couldn't do this without you. And it is always a pleasure at this time when we get together as a people to learn from those who have gone ahead, from those who have done things that we aspire to, that encourages us, and who are willing to share it with us. So thank you, blessings, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.
Great. Good night, everybody. Just wanted to add my thanks, Margaret. You know, when they say you confer on somebody a knighthood, as our first Black Pack host, we want to confer on you the Order of the Black Hood. The services to our community that we greatly appreciate.
Thank you. I gratefully accept.
Good, thank you. Okay. So people can put their cameras on and give some claps and thank our wonderful interviewee tonight, Margaret Busby, as we listen to some music as we go out. So enjoy the rest of your evening.